Hello, welcome to another Tweedy Pubs video. As always, sorry about the traffic noise. We're also in the middle of Storm Ciarán, is it? So you're likely dealing with wind noise and later torrential rain. First pub, the Churchill Arms. It is quite a thing to behold from the outside, so it really does require a little bit of distance in order to get the whole thing in shot. They're currently in the process of sort of Christmasifying it. Other times of the year this is festooned with hanging baskets, and by about mid-November this will be fully Christmased up. Cheers from the Churchill Arms. Fuller's pub today. London Pride came at sort of £5.75 for a pint. I'm eating here as well. That's the larger than usual beer serving. Not many pubs to get around today. Yes, this pub today is probably most striking for its exterior and the expenditure to maintain the hanging baskets and the window boxes runs to sort of tens of thousands. I think a figure I saw from a few years ago was £25,000 a year before the water bill. I'm not even sure that includes the Christmas decorations. So very lavish spending on the outside, and we have the previous landlord largely to thank for that, a gentleman called Jerry O'Brien, who retired I believe in 2017 after about 30 years of service running this pub. It's a fairly sort of plain, ordinary exterior that you might just walk past without noticing when he took it up in 1985, and since then it's turned into this bit of a global phenomenon in terms of the exterior particularly. I think the interior is also a bit of a visual feast. The pub dates from the 1820s, and we'll get onto that a little bit more later on, but the interior, the current interior, is sort of interwar. It's 1930 thereabouts. Of note are the stained glass windows, and of course there's an absolute Aladdin's cave, if that's the right word, of knickknacks hanging from the ceilings, including one of the most impressive displays I've ever seen of chamber pots. Also noteworthy in pub history for being probably the first pub to serve Thai food. You may have noticed that's a bit of a phenomenon. Not long after Jerry O'Brien took up the pub, he decided he wanted to sort of up the food offering a bit, and had a friend of a friend who was a Thai chef who was interested in doing a collaboration. It was very popular with customers, and it just sort of magically worked somehow. And part of the secret to its success is that Thai cuisine can apparently be made in a relatively small place, and pub kitchens are often tiny, cramped spaces. There are snob screens on the bar, which is normally something you'd expect to find in a pub, which is also more partitioned. As we find the interior today, it's pretty much open plan, like all modern pubs. The walls mostly have wood panelling. I think that possibly is dating back to the 1930s, and there's also a couple of nice tiled fireplaces. The part of this pub that I've found most intriguing is the name. Of course, today there is a collection of Winston Churchill related memorabilia around the pub. You can also see his picture on the signboard hanging outside, but the pub is not named after Winston Churchill, of 20th century fame at least. There are records indicating that this pub was named the Churchill Arms from about 1826 onwards. I've seen newspaper clippings mentioning it from about the 1830s. So well before Winston Churchill's time, this pub was already called the Churchill Arms. But it's a bit of a mystery as to why exactly that would be, because I searched around and couldn't find any connection between the Spencer Churchill family that Winston Churchill was part of and this area of London. Churchill's grandfather, the 7th Duke of Marlborough, also a Churchill or a Spencer Churchill, apparently drank in this pub. There's no sort of proof of that, but he wasn't born until the 1820s, so it certainly wasn't named after him unless he was in here as a toddler. A bit of a mystery. I've seen at least one explanation that suggests maybe it was a corruption of Church Hill or Church on the Hill. We are on Kensington Church Street here, and it does go up a bit of a hill towards Notting Hill, as the name might suggest. That's a hill. But I find that unconvincing somehow. The church that Kensington Church Street is referring to is down at the bottom of the hill near High Street, Kensington. And also, at the time this pub was built, its address would have been, the whole street wasn't called Kensington Church Street, it was called Silver Street, and for a while this sort of run along Silver Street was called Peel Place. Now the whole thing's just been renamed Kensington Church Street, so I couldn't find any other references to this area being called Churchill, so I'm unconvinced by that derivation. So I suspect it was probably a reference to some earlier member of the Churchill family, possibly the first Duke of Marlborough, who was a celebrated soldier, albeit several decades before the pub was built. Kensington barracks were at one time nearby, so perhaps there was some kind of military history there tying in with that. But it remains a bit of a mystery why this pub is called the Churchill Arms. It's the name a bit of an enigma, but still a great pub in its own right. Very, very popular. Amazed on a grim November weekday lunchtime how just about every table was taken. A lot of tourists, you know, as you might expect for a pub like this that's so photogenic, particularly from the outside, but you know, rightly so. Next up, the Uxbridge Arms. This is just set back from the main road where Notting Hill Gate tube station opens out onto. I think that road is also at that point called Notting Hill Gate. It's in a nice, relatively quiet back street. Still going to be beset by traffic noise, and I know very little about this pub. This is my first time here, but it does just make it onto CAMRA's list of historic pub interiors with a 1-star rating. So there's obviously at least some merit to be found herein. Let's take a look. Cheers from the Uxbridge Arms. This is a little bit of a hidden gem. I had never been here before. I knew a couple of other pubs in the area, but I'm really taken with this interior. It's the pub originally dates from the 1830s, 1836, but much of the interior we see today is 1930s. There is a 1930s brick fireplace on one side. On the other side, at least according to CAMRA's notes on the interior, is more likely 1950s. The panelling on the bar counter, probably 1930s as well. Assortment of not an overwhelming number, but an assortment of interesting kind of prints and artifacts and knickknacks on the walls. I'm pleased to see, at least the bit I'm sitting in, wonderful absence of any horrible gastropub type paint, which is great. And I haven't looked at the back bar yet. Really nice room here off to the left as you come in through the door, which is carpeted still. The rest of the pub is wood floors, but you know, of some age. Nice kind of banquet, can't pronounce that word still, seating around the edges. Like I say, sort of tasteful but interesting collection of curios on the walls. The landlord is apparently Irish and takes some care over the Guinness, and I have to say that's a rather beautiful half of Guinness there. And the TV screens, obviously, never my sort of thing, but they won't be here forever, and I'm sure sometimes they're switched off if nothing's happening. But yeah, this is really nice and wonderfully quiet. What a contrast between here and the Churchill Arms around the corner, which is obviously very much on the tourist trail. Here, at least in the daytime, doesn't seem to be. The pub is on Uxbridge Street, and the name either of the street or of the pub may relate to Henry Paget, the first Marquis of Anglesey, who had the additional title of the Earl of Uxbridge. He's remembered in one of the cabinets on the wall of the far side of the pub from where I'm sitting now, with his jacket from when he was a lieutenant colonel. He fought in the Battle of Waterloo. He was injured quite seriously at the Battle of Waterloo, riding alongside Wellington. He said, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." To which Wellington replied, "By God, sir, so you have." So yes, a surprise hit there, the Uxbridge Arms. I was just sort of including that on the list as almost as filler, which sounds a bit mean, but was just had a really nice air to it. Perhaps it was partly that it was quiet. Nice guy behind the bar. He was very chatty and friendly. Only 2 other customers in there. Not a lot. I mean, it probably worth noting there wasn't really a lot on the bar. The hand pumps were looking all a bit barren. I think it was just at a sort of changing of the barrels moment, and there was only one hand pump actually working, some sort of blonde beer that I didn't really like the look of. That's why I went for the Guinness, but I'm glad I did go for the Guinness because it was in spectacular form. Next up, and I'm going to have to do this bit of blurb relatively quickly because it's starting to rain, the Windsor Castle. This is probably, after the Churchill Arms, the second most famous pub in Kensington, and it certainly is one I've been to before a couple of times. Quick notes about the exterior. Have a sort of stuccoed frontage. It wasn't always like this, with rusticated coins. There we go. This is the rustication, very exaggerated coins on the corner there. There's a timbered section around One of the entrances here marked Campden Bar, and that has benches flanking it either side, and sort of bottle glass windows, I suppose we could just about call those, at least some panes of bottle glass, quite possibly more recent there. Chairs from the Windsor Castle. I'm a bit in silhouette there, probably you can just about see me. This pub is roughly contemporary with the Churchill Arms. It was built in 1826, and similar to the Churchill Arms, had an extensive remodelling in the 1930s. CAMRA, in their inventory of historic pub interiors, give it a 3-star rating, which is the highest rating they ever give out, and Historic England comment that it's exemplifying the Old English phase of interwar pub design. There are 4 distinct bar areas inside. There's the Campden Bar, the Sherry Bar, the Ordinary Bar, and the Private Bar. So the naming is obviously a bit tailored compared to the usual, typical Victorian era pubs. You would expect a private, a public, and maybe a saloon bar or something like a lounge bar. So Campden Bar obviously refers to the street that this is on. It's unclear which of those exactly correspond to the equivalent of a public bar. My understanding is that private bars typically were bars reserved for the regulars, and I assume either the Ordinary Bar or the Campden Bar were there for just sort of passing one-off trade. If you happen to be coming in and didn't consider yourself to be a person of standing, you would go into one of those 2 areas. The Sherry Bar is presumably reserved for sort of slightly more upmarket clientele, serving presumably sherry. Campden Bar, which I'm in at the moment, has these, I would call these high-backed settles, sort of pew-like benches that are built in to the woodwork. Here in the Campden Bar, the bar back is mahogany, and according to CAMRA's interior survey, may well be the only surviving Victorian feature of the pub. I think this section is called the Ordinary Bar, or the Ordinary, and this would originally, may not have been part of the pub proper originally, because it doesn't have a separate entrance, so it'd be strange to have separate entrances for the other 3 bar areas, but not this one. Today it's more of a sort of dining area, dividing wall, I suppose, between the Campden Bar and the Ordinary over there. It's less like a partition and more like it could have been possibly a wall to an adjoining business, or just a separate area of the building altogether originally. One of the things this pub is famous for are these low doorways between the different areas through the partitions. This one is not quite as extreme. We'll see a slightly shorter one in a minute, but the purpose of these was that the pot boys and the staff of the pub would move between the different areas of the pub, but the customers wouldn't. They would come in from an external door into their area of the pub, and the whole time they were there, they would have access to part of the bar counter, but they would never actually move between the different sections of the pub. Fortunately, we can do that today, but it's a bit of a fun novelty because they are extremely short. I think the one over to the other side between the Private Bar and the Sherry Bar is something like 3 foot 6 inches tall, apparently. This is the Private Bar.
Because then he's like, okay, this is the hotel back.
One of those fixed benches, high-backed sort of, I would call these settles, but pew-like benches. Finally here we have the Sherry Bar. You can just see it's obscured by a sign to the reverse of the engraving in the glass. It looks more modern to me. This presumably would have been for the more wealthy clientele. Windsor Castle's quite a popular pub name. I can think of at least a handful that I know or have known in London over the years. And according to the Dictionary of Pub Names, there were at one time as many as 17 in the London area alone. In the case of this particular Windsor Castle pub, apparently one of the reasons that it was named thus is that on a clear day you could see Windsor Castle from here. We're on a tiny bit of a hill here in Kensington, and maybe that's just about believable when the surrounding area was less built up. Today it's owned, or at least operated, by Mitchell and Butlers as part of their Castle pub brand. And that tends to specialise in what they call iconic pubs. I suppose this would be fair to call this an iconic pub. This is Timothy Taylor's landlord. It was a familiar lineup of beers, which must be a sort of standard Mitchell and Butlers pub type offering. They had landlord, do bar. Some of you absolutely hate tribute Wainwright something or other. It's definitely on the expensive end of the scale, but you know, it is an iconic pub. Very pleased to have been able to be here in a bit of a lull and a quiet period, particularly having seen how busy the Churchill Arms was. There's no music, you can just hear the sound of chatter in the background. The sense of space you get from the partitions, from poky little rooms, is wonderful, and it was a great decision to not remove those. I think it would completely lose its charm if they were taken away. Okay, next and probably final pub for today's short tour of Kensington, the Elephant and Castle. It is raining again. I would do more blurb out here, but I'm getting wet. Cheers from the Elephant and Castle in Kensington. I'm finding it slightly hard to fathom which pubs are going to be quiet, which pubs are going to be busy today. It seems to be a surprisingly popular pub. I would consider this a bit of a backstreet pub, but it's obviously not sufficiently enough of a backstreet to deter, you know, quite a lot of tourists from that High Street Kensington, the tube station down there and all the shops and everything. It dates to 1865. Slightly to my surprise, this is on CAMRA's list of historic pub interiors. It just has a 1-star rating, so it's the sort of lowest grade that just sort of makes the cut. It's a Nicholson's pub today. I wouldn't say they're the best at preserving the charm of pub interiors. I don't think they've necessarily trashed the interior, but they cover it with a lot of modern junk, and it wasn't getting a particularly great feeling inside on this particular occasion. The bar back is of some note. It was originally a Charrington's pub, and there is still some of the original sort of brewery signage in the bar back. This pub was at one time popular with journalists, possibly still is today. You may be aware of the exodus from Fleet Street in the city, or the edge of the City of London, in the 1980s, and the former newspaper offices that were based in Fleet Street sort of spread far and wide. The Daily Mail, as it happened, ended up in Kensington, round the corner at Northcliffe House. So at least at some point in history, this was quite a popular pub for journalists from the Daily Mail, and there is some memorabilia inside the pub to highlight that. Another random piece of history for the local area. This is on Holland Street, the Elephant and Castle, and Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin fame once ran an occultist bookshop here in the 1970s. Now, as a name, the Elephant and Castle is one we hear quite a lot, and I've never really questioned before where that comes from. There are various theories, most of them which have a lot of criticism and controversy surrounding them. The one that seems most defensible to me, but is still apparently debunked by some experts, is that it relates to the worshipful company of cutlers, the people who were responsible for making knives and forks, essentially. And if you look at the crest adopted by at least the 17th century of the worshipful company of cutlers, they have an elephant with a castle on its back. You might wonder why an elephant would have a castle on its back in the first place, but it's probably sort of an iteration, a pictorial iteration of what's called a howdah. You may have seen the aristocracy of the subcontinent, the Maharajas and such, being carried atop an elephant with a sort of carriage that has a roof on top of it. It's called a howdah, and I suppose in some renditions of that started to look like a miniature fortress. It's worth noting that the current, probably much more modern signage on the frontage of the pub here does appear to be a very close relation of the version of the elephant with the castle on used by the worshipful company of cutlers. You can see it on Cutlers Hall. The reason that the worshipful company of cutlers employed the elephant in the first place as part of their crest, their trade association or guild crest, is because the handles of cutlery were often made of ivory. I think this is probably as good a backdrop as any in the rain to call it a day. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that's been interesting and or informative. I think there's at least 3, I would say, really solid pubs that are worth a visit if you find yourself in the Kensington area there. So, and as I say, I will probably cover the rest of Kensington maybe in a different video, but that's sort of the north bit anyway. Thanks for watching, see you on the next one.